That was insane.
Told you to walk away. That was my first and last mistake. I'm blue without your face. But what can I do? 'Cause I'm just a sinking ship, and you're just a pair of lips that I've lost in the moment. All I want is for you to come back. Now I'm caught in the middle of life, and I need you.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Red Pill Diaries. I'm your host, Rashid, and without further ado, I got to bring on my colleague and a friend of the show who has been on multiple times and now is super popular, my guy, Alex Krainer. How's it going, Alex?
I'm good, doing well, Rashid. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Before we go into the show, Alex, I was seeing you, in the background. I was in my booth, and I was waiting for the show to go live, and I just got disconnected. Everything just shut down, completely shut down. And if it wasn't for my son, I don't know how I would have gotten back up because I was trying to do the show, and it seems like everything, the computers, the internet, everything, and that was like unbelievable the way that it did. But by the grace of God, we're back on and we can do the show, man.
Good thing then.
Let's go right into it. Before we talk about Syria and everything, what is going on in the EU? One of my viewers wanted to know about the Romanian elections and wanted you to give your take on that. So would you please give me your take on that? Plus, why isn't there an outrage over the election anomalies in Romania as if there was an election outrage in Belarus or Belarus?
Well, back in, when was it, in November, Calin Georgescu was running for president, and he won the first round.
Mm-hmm.
He won the most votes of all candidates, but it was he only voted, I think, about 23% of the vote. So nobody got a majority. They were supposed to go to the second round of the elections, and then they eliminated him because he was the wrong candidate. People voted wrong, and then ensued weeks of legal harassment. And when, I think in February, when he was on his way to, when he was on his way to submit his candidacy for the second election, the first one was annulled, right? Because people voted wrong. When he was about to submit his candidacy for the second election planned for May, they arrested him, and then they banned him from running. And in his stead ran this other guy whose name just slips my mind now. Okay, doesn't matter. But he won the first round of elections with something like 40% of the vote, 41% of the vote, versus the European pro-European candidate Dan, who won, I think, 21% of the vote. And then 2 weeks later, it inverted, and Dan won 53% of the vote, and the pro-sovereigntist candidate won only 41% of the vote. No, sorry, 46.
George Simeon.
Yeah, George Simeon. Sorry, the name just slipped my mind. It's been a long day. And so it's a very, very strange thing, because George Simeon almost immediately conceded, said everything was cool, everything was legit. I lost, and the fight goes on. I think that's a bad taste. The elections left a bad taste, because it seems that the election was rigged, probably was, but the George Simeon, it's a question whether he was sincere in all this, or whether he kind of allowed himself to be defeated and then just conceded too soon, even though he himself claimed that something like 1.7 million dead people voted. You know, yeah. So I don't know. Once I saw that Simeon lost, I didn't pay close attention anymore.
Mhm.
But these things. The French elections were stolen. Last French elections were stolen. Um, German elections were probably rigged. And maybe they get their person into the government, whoever they need to be in the government, but people are not convinced. People are not supportive, and so the government ends up being semi-illegitimate. In France, Macron ought to have stepped down long time ago. He didn't. He's still president, but he's a very weak president, and people in France absolutely hate him. And I think that he could conceivably end up overthrown in a coup. That's that may seem unthinkable for a Western European country, but I know some people close to the French military circles, and they tell me that they think that this is going to a civil war, and that they're preparing for it.
Hmm.
And so how things are going to go in Romania, I don't know. But last time there was a despot in power, he ended up shot along with his wife in 1989, Nicolae Ceausescu and his wife Elena. So maybe the globalists are stringing along a sequence of Pyrrhic victories, but it remains to be seen whether they are going to be able to maintain control, because there is legitimate discontent. People know that the election in Romania were stolen. That there's no justifiable reason why Calin Georgescu should have been eliminated, other than that he wasn't to the liking of the globalists and the Eurocrats, who have probably designated Romania to be the next Ukraine, to go and fight Russia to the last Romanian, and which is why they built they are building a massive NATO base in Romania, and they need also Romanians to fight for control of the Black Sea and to support Ukrainians in their fight to retain control of Odessa. And so, they have their agenda, they have their plan. They're not asking the people. They just want to push people by force into the meat grinder to fight their wars for them. But people are waking up. They're starting to understand what the agenda is. They're starting to understand why the elections are being stolen from under them and their democracies are being stolen. And so at some point, the discontent might blow over. It might boil over, and it might, result in civil unrest or civil wars and coups.
Mhm.
It seems to me that we had a coup in Ivory Coast, which is extremely interesting, because Ivory Coast was going to be General Langley's base to try to destabilize Burkina Faso, or run his drones to figure out how to kill Ibrahim Traore, and now looks like it's not going to work out quite that way.
You know, I a lot of people, I hear them say, a lot of pundits, I hear them talk about how Trump is suing for peace. And I'm not picking on Trump. I'm just bringing up a lot of anomalies in reporting how Trump is suing for peace and how Trump is trying to pull the United States out of NATO, and which is, to me, is unbelievable, because NATO is the military arm of the U.S. British Empire. And so in my mind, it is absolutely insane to think that Trump is trying to bring down NATO when NATO is subservient to the U.S. and the British plans for domination. So when I see what's going on in Romania, and you see what's going on in North Africa, and when you see what's going on in what is called the Middle East, but West Asia, I think all of this is the West lashing out because they're losing their power, and they're doing everything that they can to try to maintain their grip. And they're willing to burn nations down to the ground, overthrow leaders, assassinate, and cause chaos, because they believe that out of that chaos, if they are still in a position with a little economic might or a little political say so, or a little military might, then they think that they can refashion the empire, and so that it can live to see another day. What do you say about that?
Well, okay, so I think it's always correct to look at the situation through the lens of factions rather than nations. So the United States has been pretty much since, I don't know, Reagan administration, or maybe even Carter administration, it has been under control of these globalist factions who used the United States pretty much as the military, economic, and diplomatic enforcement arm of the Western Empire. But I believe that the main vested interests of the empire are still in the city of London, and so the United States was used as the dumb muscular giant to go and smash things up as needed, and where needed, and when needed. And especially since Clinton and Obama administration, they were in that camp. So it became the United States became synonymous with the empire, even though the United States actually was created as a rejection of that empire, and as a reaction to it. And so it seems now that Trump is not on board with this, and there's been several statements from out of his administration that pretty much rejects the post World War II global order, and that explicitly embraces the multipolar integrations. So, the question is, do they mean it, or is Trump controlled opposition, and then all of this is an elaborate deception? Well, I don't know the answer to that, but if it were an elaborate deception, I would have to ask myself, why would such a deception even be necessary? Trump would make his life a lot easier if he just went along with the continuation of policy. There wouldn't be any lawfare waged against him. He would be treated in the media like he was when he was a media personality. Everything would go much smoother. And Biden was in that camp, Obama was in that camp, George H.W. Clinton. It wouldn't be very strange if Trump simply continued that tradition and stayed as the enforcement arm of the empire. But I think that Trump is sincere in wanting to return the United States to its Republican roots and reject the empire and stop being its enforcement arm. So if you wanted to embrace multipolar integrations, who would be your partners? It would be primarily Russia and China. So that means you would have to talk to them, and you have to make nice with Russia and China, and you would have to kind of accommodate them, and maybe even have them help you through the transition from being the empire enforcement global cup to being simply a major power among other powers. And I think that this is what's going on actually. Trump did pick up the phone in January or February. He called Vladimir Putin. He did the same this week. They spoke. They both came away with positive impression, regardless of whether anything groundbreaking was achieved in those talks. Nevertheless, exchanging views, swapping notes, and building bonds of understanding and trust is always a step in the right direction in that sense. Some people say like, oh, well, it's all a lie because they're still sharing intelligence with the Ukrainians. They're still sending them weapons. And I don't know, but, there's also a possibility that that's part of the arrangement. Because today the Russians are defeating Ukraine, and the kill ratio on the battlefield, my understanding is maybe as high as 20-1. So for every Russian soldier killed, 20 Ukrainian soldiers are being killed. One of Russia's 4 objectives in this special military operation was to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine, meaning that their objective is to destroy the armed force of Ukraine. So if you stop sharing intelligence and if you stop supplying arms, they stop fighting. If they stop fighting, you're not demilitarizing and denazifying them anymore. So to my mind, it's entirely plausible that things are going exactly as they're intended to be going, at least so far as Ukraine is concerned. Maybe it may be a bit different with Israel and the Middle East, but I think that the relationship between the United States and Russia is better than it has been in a very long time, and I think that the Trump abandoning Project Ukraine is exactly the right move.
I think abandoning it is exactly the right move, but I have a different take on it a little bit. I think it's out of necessity, not out of want. I think it's out of necessity that they are talking to the Russians, because this is egg on the face of the British U.S. empire. Russia has been beating the United States and all of the Western world together. And not only have they been beating them on the battlefield, they've been beating them in the political landscape and economically. And so we have to understand, when we're looking at this, we're looking at $37 trillion of public announced debt. We're looking at a United States where the tax base is shrinking. The British tax base is shrinking. The economies are stalling or in a downward spiral. We see them sanctioning everybody, and everybody that they sanction are now turning themselves to China and Russia. I think this is a tactic to save empire. When you become desperate and everything that you've tried to throw up against the wall to stick is not sticking, then you have to have a real appraisal. And I believe that they're trying to buy time. I was just looking at an article that just came out as you were talking, and it says China existential threat to the U.S., according to CIA Deputy Director. And I believe the United States, they want to continue on, the British and the U.S. want to continue on in their dominating ways, but with the limit of resources, trade, the downward spiral of the domestic economy, and the explosion in division across both the U.S. and the U.K. I believe this is making them recalibrate their thinking, because they don't have the printing press that they once had to be able to print infinitum, to then go into wars, to overthrow, to take on this guy, that guy, and that girl all at the same time. So when that happens, you have to then if you're trying to maintain the empire, as Trump says, he still wants the United States to remain the dominant power. He still wants the United States to be head and shoulders above everybody else. When you look at that, it shows me that the empire is recalibrating. They're resting, recalibrating, and rearming for the next escapade. And what they need now is some type of political capital, so that so people can say, "Oh, he's pulling out of Ukraine." He has no choice. They've been beaten. Russia is beating them. Russia is beating. And if they truly felt that they were going to give up on Ukraine, why are they still in the Baltics, trying to overthrow other nations that are in Russia's sphere of influence? Why are they still pressing Armenia to come over to the western side? So I think all of this is Trump may be sincere, and I think he's sincere in some of the things that he does, but he, as Vladimir Putin says, the U.S. presidents don't run the show. And there are men in suits, in black suits behind the scene that runs the show. And I believe these men in black suits behind the scene have now come to the realization that America no longer has the economic wherewithal to run wars this place and that place and that place. So they now must focus on their most pressing threat. So what is the most pressing threat? Russia, China, and Iran. So what do? We're losing in Ukraine, so that let's simmer down a little bit in Ukraine and build up some capital with a nation that can destroy us. And then we can take on Iran, destroy Russia and China's underbelly, which is Iran, grab the resources in Iran and the trade routes. Because remember, Iran is also building a north-south corridor so that you can bypass the Black Sea and you can go through Iran straight down to the Persian Gulf. All of and if you can weaken Iran, and then you can take on China head on. Like they say, that's the existential threat. That's the most pressing threat. And I believe that they believe if they can pacify Russia, then they can double back around if they beat Iran, if they take down China, and then do what they want to do and balkanize Russia. I think that's part of the plan that they have. What do you say on that?
Well, that would be the globalist faction in the U.S. And if we're talking about them, then I absolutely agree with everything you said. But I don't think that Trump is part of the globalist faction, because, to be a globalist is to subjugate the whole world, including your own population, to your requirements, so that you can plunder and pillage and turn the wealth of the whole world into financialized flow that ultimately accrue into your banking centers. And I just watched this week an interview between Larry Johnson and Colonel Douglas McGregor. And Douglas McGregor, as you know, spent 90 days as a senior advisor to the acting defense secretary in 2016, Trump administration, his first administration. And Trump brought him on board because he wanted him to help Trump withdraw troops from Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, and from Europe. And so Trump wanted to do that. And what happened is that Douglas McGregor told him, well, you can do one of those things, but you can't do all of those things. And so they kind of settled, like, okay, let's withdraw from Afghanistan. Let's see how we can do that. And basically McGregor told him, well, all you have to do is you have to draft an executive order saying we're withdrawing from Afghanistan. And then Trump asked him to do that. So Douglas McGregor drafted the executive order, and Trump, when he received it, he was, all right, that's great, I love it. And he signed the executive order. And then apparently everybody went crazy. So he had people from the Senate, from the House, from the Senate Select Arm Committee, Mitch McConnell, and a whole bunch of people descend on the White House to say we can't do this. This we must not do this. And they were talking about the allies and what are the allies going to say. We have commitments towards them and the contractors and this and that. In the end, they talked him out of withdrawing from Afghanistan. And so he didn't exactly give up completely, but he said, okay, well, let's draw down to the maximum. How many troops do we need to leave there? And they said 5,000 troops. So they left 5,000 troops. And those 5,000 troops were basically contractors because, they had to keep the money flowing. So what that tells you is that Trump has come to the White House and to the presidency with certain ideas, which I think are not impossible to read. What he actually wants to do is not difficult to read, but he's facing very stiff opposition from various interest groups, the swamp, which is still there, as you said, men in black suits. And so I think that the first time around, 2016, he didn't understand all this. So he just went, oh, let's withdraw from Afghanistan. And then they said, no, you don't. That's not how it works. And they beat him back. They force him back from jeopardizing their interest. You notice what he's doing now. He's not giving away his intentions, because for the last 122 days that he's been in office, he's been writing 2 tracks with respect to Ukraine. Steve Witkoff, General Kellogg. So Steve Witkoff talked to the Russians, met with Putin several times, and he was the go-between who was exchanging, who was informing the two sides of what the situation is, what their intentions are, how to resolve the situation. Whereas General Kellogg was completely on board with the Brits, with the French, with the Europeans, with NATO, to let's force the Russians to sign a 30-day unconditional peace ceasefire, and let them force them into this kind of a peace and this, and we're going to dictate, and Russians are going to have to accept. And then, along the whole thing, their intention was to still get the United States back on board to be the security guarantor for Ukraine. So by running those 2 tracks at the same time, he was concealing his intentions, right? And people thought okay, maybe he's going to go along with the Kellogg plan. And so everybody was, Kellogg was going here and there and meeting with everybody in Kiev, in Paris, in London, and so forth, in Brussels. And they were doing a lot of talking and putting everything into the Kellogg plan. And then when the day came, Trump calls Putin, they talk, and then the next thing, he's doing something completely else, and Kellogg and his plan is completely off the table. Had he, from the very start, said, "Oh, we're gonna not go with the European plan. We're not gonna be a security guarantor for Ukraine at all. That's my decision." He would have been savaged in the media for 122 days straight. Like in the first term. So I think that the consequence that he's doing things a little bit different this time around is that it's very difficult to read him. The administration seems chaotic. It seems like they don't have a clue. They don't have a plan. And maybe it's true that they don't have a plan, but it does seem to me that they have a mission. And the fact that the United States is no longer going to be a guarantor of security for Ukraine is absolutely huge. It is huge. It cannot be underestimated, because that one commitment changes everything. Because that one commitment would oblige the United States to come to the defense of Ukraine if the Russians went before the 4 oblasts. It would oblige the United States to come to the aid of NATO troops in Ukraine if they came under Russian attack, which means that it would enable the French and the British to insert their troops into Ukraine. They were talking about 5,000, 10,000 troops, whatever. It didn't matter how big the troops were. They were there. They would have been placed there to be a tripwire, so that when the Russians attack, they say like, okay, now is the time for you to honor your guarantee and come to the aid of NATO troops there. And from there, you start the escalation. And so Trump put a stop to all that. And so you can see how terribly vexed the Europeans are about this. They're absolutely hysterical. Their heads are exploding. But this is a real change of course. And it's a change of course away from us going towards a nuclear Armageddon. So it's not to be underestimated. And I think that Trump does deserve credit for this.
Well, maybe he does. And I agree with you on certain points, but we have to also remember that the defense secretary and Donald Trump and Rubio, the Secretary of State, told the European partners that the United States can no longer afford to be every place all the time. So they have a division of labor. They want Europe to keep it smoldering in Ukraine. They want Israel to go after Iran, and that way that they can confront China, because they see China as the most pressing threat. To me, that doesn't seem like the empire backing down. To me, that just seems like reprioritizing your goals because you no longer have the. It's just like this. If I've lived a life of luxury for a long time, and I go and I look at my bank statement, and I have all of these credit card, outstanding credit card payments, and all of these other bills, and I look and I say, okay, but I only have this amount of money. It forces me to reprioritize which ones are the most pressing, the most needed. So then I can divvy up my money to pay the ones that are most pressing, and hopefully on the back end catch the other ones. And it seems like that's what's going on. And I'm not talking about Trump per se. If you hear me say Trump, I'm talking about the American administration, the American empire. And Trump gets credit for it because he is the president. So you may hear me say the Trump administration. And the British Empire, which are one and the same. I always tell people the U.S. and the British Empire are one and the same. They're doing the same thing. So I think it's a recalibration of priorities because they're losing. They're losing economically. They're losing politically. They're even losing where they dominated without rival, and that is in the press. And they've had the bully pulpit for so long, and now the whole world is watching that their weapons are not as effective as they once were. Their color revolutions can be stymied if you pay attention to them. There's a rise in disregard and disdain for Western domination, Western policies, and Western democracy because they want to tell everybody else what to do and how to do it. And then you have this Romania and all of the Ukraine elections, and nobody says anything, the overthrow of Yanukovych. So they're being exposed. And I think this is forcing them to recalibrate to build up capital. When everybody's looking at you as a thief and you're trying to get in this person's house, you want to shed that light of a thief and offer some goodwill so that it will make it more amenable to you to go through the back door the next time no one is looking to steal the TV out the house. And I think that's what the U.S. and the British Empire is doing.
That's excellent. Well, Rashid, I don't know. You may be right, and I may be wrong, because at this point we can't be sure. We are only guessing.
Yeah.
But the reason why this doesn't make exactly sense to me is because without the U.S. support, the Europeans are toast. I mean, they're finished. They are so completely dependent on the United States for these sophisticated weapons, for nuclear weapons, for satellite spying and targeting technologies, for logistics support, for the industrial support for the military, that they don't stand a snowball's chance in hell against the Russians. So, the division of labor wouldn't work out. The Europeans would simply buckle under Russian assault if the Russians decided to go and continue, territorial conquests after Ukraine, which is not going to happen. The dynamic is reverse. It's been the European powers, it's been the West that has been desperately, fanatically obsessed with trying to conquer and dismember and destroy Russia and take control of Russian resources and turn the Russian people into their serfs or slaves. And that's been going on since at least the early 1700s. The Poles tried it, the Swedes tried it, the French tried it, the Germans tried it, and it usually wasn't, like Napoleon 1800s. It wasn't Napoleon's invasion. It was the whole Europe behind Napoleon. It was something like 30 or 40 countries that contributed troops to that invasion force. And then the same thing happened under Hitler. It wasn't just German army. It was the Finns, the Swedes, the Hungarians, the Poles, the Slovaks, the Czechs, the Croats, the Bulgarians, Romanians, Spaniards, Italians. The way they taught us history is not true. This is some kind of a dark obsession of European elites, or, more correctly called European banking parasite. And it will continue for as long as that parasite is there. And the problem is that this time around, they've made themselves completely and totally dependent on the United States. They thought they had the United States under control. They took it for granted that they would be able to use the United States for their purposes ad infinitum. And they would have, believe me, they don't care that the United States is going bankrupt. They don't care that the United States military is becoming exhausted and depleted. They will do with the United States exactly as they've done with Ukraine. They wouldn't say like, oh no, wait, stop, this is too much. Let's not do this anymore. No, they would say, go and fight to the last American. They don't care. Last Ukrainian, last American, last Romanian, last Pole, last German. They will keep on. They don't care what it costs, because whatever it costs, it helps them stay on top, because at the end, there's going to be reconstruction, and then they're going to be pulling money out of thin air and lending it to everybody to say, here, we're going to give you credit for reconstruction and development, and we're going to help you, and we're going to help you structure your new governments. They thrive on chaos. They have done for 5-6 centuries, and I have to hold on to the optimism and the hope that by putting Trump in the White House, the American people have rejected this again. And I think that we shouldn't, it's easy to look at the situation, and then like some like football fans, when the game is not going exactly as they would like to, they are they go wild, and they're ready to sack half the players and give the coach 10 consecutive death penalties. And they think like, if only I was in charge, I know exactly how to win the game, but we have to also think about what the United States might look like today if Kamala Harris was in the office for 122 days. And I suspect that the United States would now begin to resemble Keir Starmer's Great Britain. That the warmongering would be stepped up, that the repression and censorship would be stepped up. The United States would have still been in the World Health Organization. They would have signed up to the Global Pandemic Treaty. The Brits wanted to kill Elon Musk's ex. That was their explicit goal. That's why they brought their Center for Countering Digital Hate, which they set up in London in 2018. They brought it in the United States in 2021, trying to set out and recreate their whole system of censorship. American people might be getting arrested on the street for praying silently, or for wearing the wrong T-shirt, or for putting hurty words in Facebook or on X, or for supporting the wrong political party, or for being mean to the LGBT people, and on and on and on and on and on. So the fact that this didn't happen tells me that the ship is slowly moving in the right direction. Trump is an instrument. The American people are the real force. And exactly in the way that they put him in the White House, they can continue to exert pressure to steer him in the right direction, to strengthen his hand and to weaken the hand of his opponents who want him dead. And so I think that this is all very important. And I fear that if we lose hope, if we lose faith, if we succumb to defeatism and thinking that this is all a great deception, they're all playing us, here's a controlled opposition and so forth, the people will give up, and then Trump will be easy pickings for the globalists. So that's why I think that for as long as it seems plausible that he's for real and that he's trying to do the right things, I think that he should be supported. And where he messes up, the pressure needs to be applied for him to change course and to give up on shitty, stupid ideas, which there are plenty of as well, of course.
I remember in high school, I was dating this girl, and she just wouldn't do right. You've always been one of those, whether it's a guy or a girl, flip the script or whatever, and she just wouldn't do right. And you said, but you were so taken by her, and you kept, I'm not gonna take it this time, and you took her back, and I remember my sister telling me, when a person shows you who they are, believe them. And so that stuck with me throughout the years, and more so than Trump himself, the political climate, the political atmosphere, the system itself feeds off of debt, feeds off of misery, feeds off of suppressing knowledge and stopping it being disseminated to the masses. So I realize that Trump may have some ideas, but when we look at his policies, he has made policies that bring more U.S. citizens to serfdom. Because if you look at the policies when it concerns the economy, he is more in line with the Fed. And we already know what the Fed is about. The Fed is about bringing everybody to heel for the benefit of the few banking families or whatever like that. And so when a person shows me that, I don't care what he's saying over here. I don't even care if he's doing a little good over there. But if you're ripping out my economic lifeline and you're also supporting the very institutions that are stopping me and others from being educated and enlightened in a way that we can preserve our independence, our sanctity of life, then I have no respect for you in that manner. And because you are a shield to the empire, you may be there and you may be able to get one or two things in. But let's look at the policy. Let's go to this article real quick, and I want you to give me your comment on it. It's the article about the existential threat to the U.S. And it says, unlike the Cold War with the USSR, the competition with Beijing is primarily along economic lines, Michael Ellis has said. China's economic might makes the Asian nation a unique challenge as the U.S. competes with it for global influence, CIA Deputy Director Michael Ellis has said. Stop right there for a minute. They don't see Russia in that light. They don't believe that Russia can compete with them economically. So it's not the priority. It's not the threat. So what do? You prioritize your threats, and you take on the threat that looks to supplant you as the major power. This is, we go right here and it says, China is an existential threat to American security. What? How hard? They're not setting up bases around the United States. They're not threatening war with the United States. They're only reacting to the threats that are being leveled at them from the United States. It says China is the existential threat to the American security, in a way that we really have never confronted before. See, Russia had the military means to confront the United States. I mean, the Soviet Union, but they never really had the economic means or the political clout. So we're looking at a recalibration now from this war that they thought that they could break Russia through Ukraine by sanctioning it, tricking it to go into Ukraine, justifying sanctions, breaking the economy. Now they're realizing that it's backfiring. And so while this is going on, they are looking at China elevate 850 million people from poverty to the middle class. They're looking at China graduating tens of millions of engineers and scholars every year, and all while the United States economy is unraveling. So they see China in a different perspective, a very bad perspective. It says, China is the existential threat to American security in a way that we really never have confronted before, Ellis said in an interview with Axios on Wednesday. Unlike the Soviet Union, the current competition is primarily unfolding along economic lines, he explained. Ellis said technological supremacy in fields such as artificial intelligence, quantum computing, biotechnology, semiconductors, and advanced energy storage will ultimately determine the outcome of the geopolitical contest. So the reason they're trying to recalibrate from Russia is not because they have this understanding that, okay, Russia, we can be friends with Russia and we can do this. No, it's because they see the most pressing threat, and they don't have the economic, the political, or the military wherewithal to take on both threats at the same time. So they are now focusing on that major threat because China is already leading in artificial intelligence. China is already leading in quantum computing. China is already leading in biotechnology. They are catching up with the US and the West in semiconductors and advanced energy storage. They're either even or pulling ahead. And they know this is where it will determine the world order. This is why Trump is befriending Russia. Because remember, I don't know if you can remember this, but I remember it well, when he says that we must break the bond between Russia and China. We must separate China and Russia from each other. And this is what came out of Trump's mouth. So it wasn't that he so beloved Vladimir Putin or beloved Russia. It's because he saw an advantage to engaging Russia. And that's what I'm saying to you. The empire is full of tricks. And if you've tricked me, what did George Bush family say? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me, or what? Something he said. That was
no, crazy. He said, "Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, you can't fool me again."
So this is what I'm saying. We all want to believe that this is a change, but when you look into the think tanks of the West and look at their writings on their websites, as Brian Boledic likes to point out, I got to give him credit on this. He likes to point this out. The policies that they want initiated on those things, it's exactly what is being done now. So there is little to no difference. Maybe here and there, a few nuances here and there, but there are little to no differences in the policies of the American and British Empire.
I don't disagree with that, Rashid. But remember, it's only been 122 days, and I agree that when somebody shows you who they are, believe them. But this doesn't apply to politicians in the same way, because they do pretend a lot and they do conceal who they really are and show themselves for something other than who they are. So I'll tell you my experience following Vladimir Putin. Because when Vladimir Putin came to power in 1999, in Russia. First, he was the acting prime minister, I think, and it was only in May of 2000 that he ran for election and became president. So at first, he seemed completely like the errand boys of the same oligarchs that were running Russia for the previous 9 years, since 1991. And he actually went out of his way to maintain that impression. And the first foreign leader that came to see Vladimir Putin in St. Petersburg 2 weeks before his election was Tony Blair. And Tony Blair, it was arranged that Tony Blair and Vladimir Putin both go to a theater play in St. Petersburg. This was widely regarded as West Great Britain, Tony Blair giving support to Vladimir Putin so that he gets elected. And he did, right? And then over the following 2 years, Blair and Vladimir Putin held 9 meetings. Like, Blair didn't spend as much time with any other world leader as he did with Vladimir Putin. And then the Brits gave him a state visit. The first time any Russian leader had a state visit since the 1700s, more than 200 years. Okay. And so for the first 2 years, even longer, Vladimir Putin appeared exactly as the continuation of Boris Yeltsin's policy. He looked like the oligarch's errand boy and the servant of the Western financial interests. And it wasn't until about 2003 when he lined up his oligarchs and said, okay, people, this is how it's going to be. And then the West understood that they cocked up by bringing Vladimir Putin to power. And, at some point, Richard Dearlov, who was ambassador in Russia, I think, at that time, and who was later head of MI6, he himself said, yeah, we brought him to power and we cocked up. That was a mistake. We deeply regret that. But it wasn't apparent straight away because, had Vladimir Putin come out and said like, hey, you know what? I'm going to turn things around in Russia. It's not going to be like it was before. They would have removed him then and there. So, he had to clean house. He had to drain the swamp at home. He had to set up his base to have political power, legal power, in order to be able to tackle the oligarchs. And it was only in 2003 that he ended up arresting the wealthiest of the oligarchs, Igor Khodorkovsky. Trump took office 122 days ago after probably 4 decades of the United States continually serving the globalist empire and all of the American structures of power being deeply infiltrated. I just shared with you the Colonel Douglas McGregor story about Trump wanting to withdraw U.S. from Afghanistan and how that didn't work out. That swamp is still there. He's still getting attacked over everything he's doing. These articles that appear in the press and a lot of stuff that even that appears in social media, I have to regard it as psyops, because it's this thing of the United States taking down China, that doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, that's so idiotic. It's almost beyond stupid. You can't do that. Now, I know that the globalists and the imperial cabal would want to do that, but I also know that would cost the United States destruction. The United States would end up destroyed over it. Not that they care, they don't care, but I think that if anybody cares about the United States and its people, they would not be on board for that. The real danger, Rashid, for China is if Russia goes down. That's why Ukraine is absolutely essential. Why? Because in exactly the same way, in which you used Ukraine as a bludgeon against Russia, if you manage to take over Russia, the same, in 2014, they had they staged a coup in Ukraine. They brought a Victoria Nuland handpicked the new government, and then they started this process of weaponizing Ukraine against Russia. Well, they didn't start it exactly, but they ramped it up into high gear. If they managed to regime change Russia, then they would be able to weaponize Russia against China, because Russia is the powerful continental military with new hypersonic technologies and thousands of tanks and jet fighters and everything. Otherwise, the United States will have to ship it all across the Pacific Ocean, which is completely idiotic. It just doesn't work at all. So this is why, for the globalist cabal, Ukraine was absolutely essential as a way to defeat Russia, or at least to destabilize it enough to regime change it, and then to bring some kind of a, Vladimir Zelensky into the Kremlin, and then start, the process of weaponizing Russia against China, to start, promoting xenophobia, China bad, we have to go to war against China, and so on. And so that was the sequence of events, use Ukraine to take down Russia, use Russia to take down China. You can't take down China by shipping tanks and aircraft and troops across the Pacific in ships. It just doesn't work. So it's not gonna happen that way. And the fact that Trump is no longer on board with Project Ukraine puts a stop to this whole train. That, again, that is, it's hard to overestimate how important this turn of events is.
And maybe that's why they're now focused on Iran, because Iran is the underbelly of both Russia and China. And they know that if they can get Iran, they can break up the Belt and Road Initiative by China, and they can hold China hostage over the land and through the sea routes, Malacca Straits and everywhere else. So the difference between when Putin came to power and Trump coming to power, Russia was under a lot of debt. But the United States is under debt the world has never seen before. She's the greatest debtor nation in the whole world, in the history of the world.
It's about the same, Rashid. When Putin came to power, Russia's debt to GDP was about 144%. And I think that in the United States today, if I'm not mistaken, it's about 130%. So it's about the same. But Russia was in a far worse shape economically. They had 40% of the population was under the poverty line. Their GDP was in the basket. The average salary in Russia was $85 a month. It was really dire in Russia in 1999, and so it was a very painful, very slow turnaround. And of course, a lot of people get hurt in the process because, they base their livelihood on systems that were able to exist thanks to large-scale corruption, and the winners in the economic competition that were designated as winner by the political class. And okay, so for me, the real test of Trump will be whether he manages to reform the banking system. And he has spoken about nationalizing the Fed. And he has spoken about reforming the monetary system. But, whether he will be able to do that, whether he knows how to do that, whether they will completely bungle that or get it right, I cannot even begin to guess. But that will be the real test, because for all the things that are happening on the foreign policy plan, his real vulnerability is domestic policy and the economy. And I think that there's no way in hell that they're going to be able to avoid inflation. There's no way in hell that they're going to be able to avoid higher interest rates. And so I think it's going to be painful for the American people for a period of time. But if they get the reforms right, there might be a turnaround similar to the way things happen in Russia. And I think that, for all this talk about Canada and Greenland, I think that plays into it. Maybe that's part of the plan. Maybe he wants to bring Canada into the mix because, one way you can deal with the debt overhang is by bringing new wealth into the system, right? So if you're $1 million in debt and you can't pay it because your annual revenues are too low, but then you manage to rob a bank and you bring in $500,000 worth of cash, well, then suddenly you're in a much better position. And, I just spent 10 days in Canada, in Alberta, in British Columbia. And, I would say that in Alberta, very close to half the population is ready to join the United States. Okay. I have to show you something.
Okay.
Oh, no. Shit, where is it? Sorry, I can't show it to you because my kids probably took it somewhere. But I got a baseball hat with the United States flag, the Canada's maple leaf on top of it with number 51. I got that in Calgary from from a friend. So I think it's going to be a bumpy ride, but I think, let's not be too pessimistic because some things might actually go right along the way. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be painful, but I think that some things might go right in the end.
What about this debt? This is what, like we were just talking about how Russia's debt was similar to the U.S. debt in the collapse of the Soviet Union. But the United States has the world reserve currency. And when this money, because remember, she's antagonizing everybody. And people are tired of taking the dollar. They're tired of sanctioning. They're tired of the United States manipulating their foreign and domestic policies and overthrowing their leaders. So now when this rush of dollars comes back ashore, we're looking at hyperinflation scenarios unlike anything we've ever seen, because Russia's debt, even when it was comparable to the United States, has never been anything close to 37 trillion in real terms. And then the what was it? I forgot the professor Korsakov, I forget his name, but he was talking about the debt of the United States and how in 2015, I believe it was, the real debt was $222 trillion. And this is the man that
right. Yes. Yeah. But that's debt plus maybe he was talking about unfunded liabilities, which is a real thing. It's a real thing. So yes, he's right. That is true. That is true.
And then he was talking about how every few years that the production in the United States goes down, the tax base withers, and the United States has become a consumer nation and not a productive nation. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, even though 40% of the people were in poverty, remember, a lot of them had gardens and stuff. They knew how to farm. They knew how to do. The United States is not like this. All we know is this right here. Looking down on the phone screen, texting, and we're not productive in that manner. So when that flood of dollars comes back to the United States, the as Gregory Mannarino says, the blowback will be biblical, because it would be tantamount to a nuclear strike, because so many people will die because the lack of food, the lack of access to essential things.
That is a very real vulnerability, and that's a very real weakness of the American system, that people have forgotten how to grow food, which is true. In the Soviet Union, everybody had a dacha, everybody had a little plot of land where they grew, potatoes and cucumbers and beets and stuff, and had chickens and eggs. And that's hugely important. And I think that the American people have to consider going back to that, to gain resilience, and they need to go back to cultivating local communities. But as far as foreign money is concerned, that is a real problem as well. And I think that, from what I gathered from Trump administration, his plan was, or at least at some point he formulated it in this way, or maybe Scott Bessent did. I don't remember, but the idea was to reform the monetary system along the lines of creating a dual circulation, so that you have foreign dollars and the domestic dollars, so that the domestic dollars are only used for domestic transactions. So meaning, like paying out salaries, taxes, shopping, all of these ordinary things that we do every day in our normal life. The foreign dollars would be to finance foreign trades and investing, right? And then, that makes sense, because in that way you would be able to maybe create a barrier from all those foreign US dollar denominated assets from getting sold and then flooding into the domestic economy without any barriers to it, and then creating hyperinflation straight away. Or inflating the asset market so that, the price of average house goes to $10 million and the stock market goes to the moon and things like this. So that makes sense. And this is the model that China has. China has a dual circulation currency system. And this is how, back in 1997, when there was this massive financial crisis in East Asia, all of those tiger economies basically collapsed overnight. Only the Chinese didn't, and it is because they had this dual currency system. I don't exactly know what the relationship is between Trump and the Chinese, but if I take his word for it, he has a very good relationship with Xi Jinping, and they have spoken on the phone multiple times. And I wouldn't exclude the possibility that the Chinese are trying to help Trump, and that the Russians are trying to help Trump, because, this all makes sense. If Trump is sincere about multipolar integration, that's his partners, the Russians and the Chinese. And so he has to be talking to them. And for them, Trump moving away from being an empire to being just a major global power on par with others makes sense for the Russians and the Chinese, because then you remove the risk of war, and you can even start discussing nuclear disarmament and all the really good things that are possible if the United States chooses not to be the global cop. I think it was Larry Johnson who said United States has a choice of being the global policeman or being the polite guest at the banquet table with the other power. And so I think that the Russians and the Chinese actually want Trump to go down this road. And Russian, one of Vladimir Putin's advisors or former advisors, Sergei Karaganov, actually said it exactly in those terms. He said, our assignment now is to help the United States transition from being an empire to just being another global power in the way that's as undisruptive as possible. So I'm very convinced that these discussions are going on, that some people in the Trump administration, maybe Trump himself, are talking with the Russians and with the Chinese about doing this transition without anything going wrong. But at the same time, they really are facing powerful enemies, which are people who are loyal to the City of London, to Paris, to Wall Street, and they're right there. They're right there. They're in the halls of power. They're in the FBI. They're in the CIA. They're everywhere. And they, as we see, they want Trump dead. Actually, 8647. That's not a joke. They want him dead. They already killed Kennedy. They killed JFK, RFK, Malcolm X. Killing another president is not a problem. They'll do it if they can.
So in closing, because we've had you a little bit over time, Alex. So what do you think? How do you think this plays out? Because I was talking to Larry Johnson yesterday on the show. It's amazing you bring him up, and he says we're going to war with Iran. He told me that. He said we're going to war with Iran.
Yes, look, I'm afraid of this as well, because it seems to me that the Zionist faction in the United States, the Zionist Jews and the evangelical Christian, are not only very powerful, but they are extremely fanatical. And I didn't research deeply into what the mindset is among the evangelical Christians. But from what I did gather is they're so fanatical and they're such zealots that if Trump ever came across as not supportive of Israel, that they might well brand him as Antichrist. For real. And they would believe it. And so how to avoid the war against Iran, I don't even know. I think that Trump sent Witkoff to talk with Iranians. Witkoff came back and said, like, oh great, we have a breakthrough. They committed that if we make the deal, they will never get nuclear weapons, and they will strictly limit their uranium enrichment for civilian use. And then he returned to Washington, and they practically wanted his head on the stake, and he immediately changed his mind. It's like, oh no, okay, Iranians, no uranium enrichment of any kind. And then they pulled out those same tire stories that have been going around for 20 years. Like, why does Iran need nuclear power at all? They have so much oil, they shouldn't need nuclear power. Iran has the right to have nuclear power under international law. It's their sovereign right. If they want to develop nuclear power, they don't need to ask the United States for permission. So it's a real problem. It's a big problem, and I think that and then the Israelis there, they will do anything they can to trigger this war, and they will even go it alone, because if they go alone against Iran, Iran's going to pulverize them. And then it's going to be next to impossible for Trump not to step in, because there's going to be hysteria in the United States that, you can't not defend Israel. So my hopes rest with Russians as mediators. Russians have offered to mediate between Iran and the United States. And Russians have some influence in Israel, because I think about 2 million Israeli citizens are actually Russians. So I really hope and pray that this situation will be diffused, and that the Russians will be able to pull the charcoals out of the fire for Trump on that front.
Once again, you hit it out of the park, my friend. Thank you so much, Alex, for joining us.
I don't know, Rashid, we're all guessing, guessing, but I have to say things in the way that they make sense to me. Yeah. And people always people often say that I give too much credit to Trump, but I want to be careful by criticizing him, because if I'm wrong, well then okay, I'm wrong. But if I'm right and we shoot him down when he's trying to do something right, then we actually hurt ourselves. So let's hope that he continues to chart course again away from the empire, that the Europeans you know, steep in their own juices, as will serve them right, and that the bonds of cooperation and friendship between United States and Russia and China continue to develop in a positive way. And then, you know, American people, you know, grow your food, meet your neighbors, keep your guns, and, and you know, it's not going to be the first crisis that you've been through. It's not even going to be the worst crisis that you've been through. And you will come on the other side. And if you look at the way Russia is today and compare it to the way Russia was 25 years ago, if these kinds of reforms happen, the United States is going to be great again, 100%. And I tell you, I'm very excited about this prospect, even though I'm not American, but my kids are, you know, so that would mean something to me.
Man, stay blessed, stay safe. Thank you, Alex, man. I'll talk to you later. And thank you for when you reached out for me, sent the condolences for my mom. I really
My sincere condolences, Rashid.
I really appreciate that. And I'll talk to you later, man. Be blessed.
Yeah, take care. Right. Bye.
All right. Everybody, thank you for joining me. I got to give a shout out to M Sparks in the building for the $5 super chat. I really appreciate that. And I have some more. Let me see something before I go. Let's see if it's still up. I want to give a shout out to, before we go off there. It's amazing how so many things are taking place internationally, but I want to give shout outs to two more people. Annette, and I might be butchering your name, Annette Venu, thank you so much. And let's see, and Catherine Boyd, thank you so much for the PayPal super chat. I really appreciate that also. Listen, everybody, things are going to get real hectic as the years go on, as the days go on, as the weeks go on, because we're in the midst of a collapse, unlike anything that we've ever seen before. Everything is out of whack. As I often say to you guys, if the things were right, there would be no need for a correction. When there's a correction, that means that something is wrong, right? You don't correct right, you correct wrong. So we're looking at a political correction, a military correction, and an economic correction, the likes of which we've never seen before. So I'm going to tell you, please prepare yourselves for what's coming, because what's coming will be biblical, will be Quranic. It will be something for the ages that people will talk about in the history books written hundreds and even thousands of years from now. Think about where we are. I want you to, before we go off there, I want you to think about where we are right now. America has been the richest, the most prosperous, and the most powerful nation in the annals of the last 6,000 years. And now we see the dollar being denied. We see the destruction of her educational system. We see the divide within her own society. We see scarcity in food. We see businesses closing down. We see bills piling up. We see anger and viciousness among the people. And on the outside, we see the American political establishment raging war like a beast around the globe. When all of this stuff comes to a head, how do you think it will happen? And what do you think the ramifications of this? Because think about it. As a person, you can't do wrong constantly and expect right to happen to you. So when we look at that and we apply that on a national landscape, and we see a nation still overthrowing nations, still arrogant, still talking down to leaders like Trump talked down to Ramaphosa. He didn't talk down to Benjamin Netanyahu, who is slaughtering tens of thousands of children. I was looking at, before we go off there, give me a few minutes with you guys a little bit. I was looking at what is that? That Israeli, I forget his name. I forget his name, but he was on one of the talk shows, and he was talking about how they have proof that the Israeli military has targeted children with direct shots to the dome and into the chest. These are specifically targeted shots. He says the UN has ample examples of that, and they piled up, but Netanyahu is not in the dock. No one is talking about that, but Trump has the nerve to talk down to Ramaphosa about a genocide that has not been proven. Now, and let us look at this, because a lot of this gets put out of whack about South Africa. Do you know there's, I think, white South Africans make up between 1% and 4% of the population of South Africa? Do you know that population are directly from the holdovers of colonialism? And do you know they run 90% of the over 90% of the farmland and 90% of all industries? How is that just? How is that just? And this was a handover to them in exchange for allowing a black government to take form in South Africa. You don't bother our colonial interests, we will allow you to make policy for your people. How is that just? Trump never, he never mentioned that. He never spoke to the ills of how, and listen, I say these things because they're right. If the shoe was on the other foot, I'll speak about it. Because don't forget that I'm the one that spoke up supporting the policy of what is his name? It slips my mind right now. Hungary, the prime minister of Hungary, when he said he wanted to keep his nation a mostly white, mostly Christian nation. I got flack for that because I said that's what his people elected him for. And that's what they know. There's nothing wrong with that because that's theirs. There's nothing wrong with that. I got flack for that. So I'm going to get flack for this too. But I'm going to call it straight down the middle. How was the land under their control gotten? It was through genocide. It was through genocide. Not 1 year of genocide, not 10 years of genocide, but decades of genocide. In Britain, one of the main proponents of colonialism is responsible for everything that is going on when you say that the South African government is taking land. No, they offer to pay for the land, which I'm going to be honest with you. I got to call it a 100. If you stole from me, I'm not paying you for squat. I'm being honest with you. I'm getting mine back. I can't shuck and jive with anybody. I got to call it like it is. So they wanted to do what Mugabe tried to do. Mugabe tried to pay for the land. The people refused to. But and they said, well, listen, these are lands that were taken from these people over here. They were dispossessed of their lands, but we're willing to pay you for these people to get their lands back. People say no. Mugabe said, listen, you got to give them back the lands that you took because that was in the agreement, what we signed in London. You got to give it back, but we're offering you compensation for it, even though we shouldn't have to. So you have some people that are saying genocide. And I'm not going to, a few people were killed on both sides. But this amounted to genocide when you're looking at what's going on in Palestine. Hell, genocide is going on in the streets of America. When they're flooding the communities with guns, no direction up here, just guns and drugs. There's a genocide. How about speaking to the ills of the communities in America instead of trying to talk down to world leaders from Hungary or for South Africa or for Zimbabwe or for Burkina Faso? How about that? You offer a few people citizenships of America, and then you turn your back to what's going on in Haiti when it is the French, the U.S., and the British who continues to destabilize Haiti so that you can use it as your drug haven, so that you can transport drugs from the Eastern Hemisphere to the Western Hemisphere and vice versa, where you can traffic organs and traffic children and women. You use that, you destabilize that. How about Trump speaking to the fact that the Haitians are under an economic burden, the likes of which most people have never heard of, that they were sued in European courts and lost to the French government because they rebelled against being occupied and being under slavery. And the French brought to court, said that they lost tens of billions of dollars because the Haitians no longer wanted to be slaves. And the European courts agreed and put the Haitians under a heavy burden. Why didn't Trump speak to that? And why did he ban immigration from them? Why is he banning it from South America? When we understand that it was the drug game of the CIA that destabilized. It was the U.S. that put Pinochet into Chile. All of this stuff is a blowback of imperialism, and nobody wants to talk to the core of that. They only want to talk superficial. So when we talk, let us talk frankly, let us have a frank discussion, and let us address the issues, because if we talk over the issues, we'll never get to a cure. That is like being diagnosed with cancer and talking about giving me a pack of Band-Aids to address this cut on my arm. See how that works for you. We've got to address the main core issues, because if those core issues do not get addressed, the world will bubble up, bubble over, and we're talking about war. Because you can only do injustice, and you can only present injustice as a just cause for so long before the truth comes out. And we're watching the world bubbling over right now. It's always everybody else's fault. It's the South Africans' fault for trying to take back their land. What is it with the prime minister? I was just saying, not Bulgaria, but what is the prime minister of the? I'm forgetting right now. Somebody's putting it in the chat. Orban. It's Orban's fault that Orban wants his people to be independent and want them to have their own traditions. It's his fault. It's the Latin American nation's fault that they want to become independent. It's Africa's fault that they want to be independent. It's China's fault that they've invested so much in education that they've lifted 150 million people out of poverty. While the West continues to spend everything, and while they're spending everything to make everybody look like they're at fault, their economy, their society, their industries, all are spinning out of control. Sometimes it takes a real man or a real woman to look in the mirror and look at the problems right in front of them instead of trying to put the problems on everybody else. As my mom says, when you point the finger, it's always a few more pointing back at you. Always. So we've got to get down to the nitty gritty, and we've got to do this thing. And sometimes it hurts. But truth hurts. Truth hurts. And sometimes you got to take the pain, because pain is an experience of life. Pain builds character if you take it the right way. Or if you take it the wrong way, you can become a psychopath, as we see the psychopathic, lunatic leadership of the Western world. We see it grow. Listen, I'm sorry I kept you guys this long. I love you all. Look for another show. I think we're doing one tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken. We've got a channel member and a Patreon stream coming up this week. We also got some new Patreon articles coming out this week, especially about some of the things that are going on right now. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining me on the most powerful platform for truth, bar none, on God's green earth. This is your platform for education, elevation, and edification. This is the Red Pill Diaries. And remember to do right by others, not because there's some material gain or because you're going to get some accolades or some applause behind it. Do right by others because it's the right, humane, and the godly thing to do. Because even when no one else is watching, remember, God Almighty is always watching. As my mother says, he may sit high, but he definitely looks low. Know that I love each and every one of you who loves truth, but know that the love that I have for you will always pale in comparison to the love that God has for you. Until we next speak again, stay strong, stay true, but above all things, remember to stay righteous. Hey, mama, to eternity and beyond. I love you more than life. Deuces, everybody. We're out of here. Peace.
Told you to walk away. That was my first and last. I'm just a sinking ship, and you're just a pair of lips that I've lost in